You are listening to Prevention is the New Cure, all things health and NHS with a political twist.
And that's with me, Dr. Helen Stokes-Lampard, and with Steve Bryan, MP.
Hello, Helen.
Hi, Steve. Good to see you again. How are you?
Welcome along to you. I'm fine. And to everyone listening to episode 26.
Very good.
Now, we've got a friend, another friend of the show, as they say, talking about cancer, genomics, future cancer a bit later on. So we'll come on to that. Last time on the pod, we talked pharmacy. Do you remember?
We did. Paul Rees, the CEO of the National Pharmacy Association. That was a good conversation. Actually quite fun.
He was very punchy, I thought. I mean, he's said that he was going to give the NPA some new zoomp, and he certainly has, hasn't he? I thought it was quite interesting when he likened pharmacists to sub-postmasters. I thought it was an interesting comment to make, but he certainly said it, and it's been picked up, actually, that comment by a few of the pharmacy press, I noticed, since.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with Paul a long time, and he certainly puts a rocket up any campaigning organization in terms of getting it out there. He's very good at getting high visibility, and he's really good at driving organizations forward to achieve. So, yes, I'm not surprised he was punchy with this. I want to pick up on one thing that we talked about. I made a comment to him that there's been some pushback from GPs about the Pharmacy First programme. The GPs had said pharmacists are being paid over £40 a consultation, whereas GPs, we get just over £100 to provide a year of care. It doesn't matter if you're 80 with 10 medical conditions or whether you are a completely fit, well, 30-year-old MP. But on social media, we got a bit of pushback and somebody saying that's not true. It's much, much less than that. It's only about £20 and so on. And so I asked social media for some evidence and nobody came back to me. So I went digging myself, and I actually dug out the service specification for the NHS. And actually, in summary, it is a payment of £15 per consultation via the scheme. Plus, of course, pharmacists get a fee for dispensing any medication they may or may not prescribe. But there's a one-off payment of £2,000 for any pharmacy that signs up, and there is an ongoing monthly payment to stay on the scheme of £1,000 every month to hit a certain number of consultations. So you don't get it unless you do a minimum number of consultations, and that's ramping up over time. So that's where the figure of 40 comes from. In fact, in this year, it's likely to be considerably more than £40 a consultation as pharmacists wrap up. But recognising a good, effective scheme has to be financially stable and will take time to get there. So I hope I've clarified that. We do like to be put a few facts behind our chatter.
Well, I think we always do. So, in other words, what I could have told our listener from the start is that Helen was right.
Did you know we have a household rule, Steve? It's really helpful. Helen's always right.
Helen's always right. That works in my house too. How a coincidence. Well, anyway, this is the NHS Prevention podcast. Did you know that? Anyway, today we are going to talk a bit about Wales. We're going to talk a bit about smoking and vaping bill. You want to mention something about breast screening and just update on something we talked about last time on that. And we're going to talk about blood sugars.
Excellent.
Should we start with Wales?
Yeah,
the land of your fathers.
Indeed. And my mother's.
Yeah.
I only have one each, actually. Yes. So we have a new First Minister, Steve.
Yes. Don't know him. Vaughan Gething, the first black leader of a European nation. Not sure. I sort of repeat that because it's what's been written everywhere. But I'm not sure why that's a thing. At the end of the day, his father was Welsh. He was working in Zambia, I think, wasn't he, when he met his mother, and they came back and lived in Wales. And he was, of course, the Welsh health minister, which some on my side of the aisle would say is a weakness. I'm sure the other side of the aisle wouldn't say that. But yeah, congratulations to him. He becomes the Welsh First Minister this week.
Yeah, it's a huge congratulations to him. I have bumped into him several times. When I was chair of the Royal College of GPs, he was the health minister in Wales. And so I met him a couple of times then. And obviously I've got a huge vested interest with all my family living in Wales. So yeah, we seriously wish him well. I mean, I think there's plenty to be done in Wales right now.
Yeah, there certainly is. What did you make of the outgoing First Minister's comments that one of the reasons why A&E is so busy and waiting lists are so high in Wales is because there's a lot of people have yeah, hit the booze and end up in A&E. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm sure you saw the comments. I mean, but I mean, more widely, why do you think the NHS in Wales does struggle? I mean, are we talking inequalities being deeper in certain parts of the country?
Um, there are so many reasons, absolutely multifaceted, and we're certainly struggling in plenty of parts of England,
Because we
Scotland, Northern
politicians
Ireland.
try and cheapen it, don't we, and turn it
Yeah,
into a political battle and, oh, well, it's
and a
Labour run
soundbite.
Wales and all
Yeah,
that sort of stuff. But the
and
truth is, it's
it's
infinitely
much
more
deeper.
complicated.
Of course it is. So look, so that specific comment about drinking, that I'm not aware that problems with drinking and unruly behaviour are any worse in Wales than they are in any of the other four nations of the UK.
Indeed.
Traditionally, we always talk about Scotland as having the greatest issues with alcohol related incidents. I do know from personal experience, my brother ended up in A&E in a very good big hospital in Wales this week, and he was 157th in the queue waiting to be seen in the middle of the day.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was grim, but they were well informed about timings and waiting times. And he did get seen in less than the 12 hours he'd been warned it would probably take to be seen. And when he was seen, he had excellent care. So that's an anecdote. But I think you've got the chronic underfunding, long-term underfunding. You've got the challenges of devolution, which are ongoing. You've definitely got wide pockets of deprivation, higher levels of deprivation on average than you have across other parts of certainly across England. Scotland, Northern Ireland have had similar challenges. It's messy. And I mean, you can say it's where people choose to invest, organize, countries choose to invest their money, the way they organize and run services. But this is a wide societal issue, and I think anyone who, from one of the other devolved nations, who tries to claim one-upmanship, I think is treading on very thin ice when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah. Smoking and vaping, just
Yeah,
to update you, obviously we
please.
record this on Tuesday and it'll go out this Thursday. Looks like the smoking and vaping bill will get its first reading in the House of Commons on Wednesday of this week. Now, what first reading means is it's
Good.
not with debate, it just means that the bill is actually tabled, the bill is actually published,
Mm-hmm.
and then it will get its second reading at some point after Easter. So this has been much awaited. I'll be honest. I think there is always a challenge in the House of Commons for prime ministers introducing legislation to have the political space to do so.
Yeah.
There's no question that Rishi Sunak is under a bit of pressure at the moment from certain sections of the Conservative backbenches, and this bill is not wildly popular with everybody on the government backbenches, it must be said. So,
Why is that, Steve? I'm sorry.
because they believe it's the nanny state, and Liz Truss said it was banning things. I don't mean to demean that view. I mean, look, it's a view. I disagree with it. In fact, I've written an article which we'll pop on the social. We'll pop a link on the social media to this podcast, but it's on the Conservative Home website last week about support for the smoking and vaping bill, and it will get its second reading after Easter, and
Good.
we'll see.
Okay, well, let's hope it gets support in the House of Lords as well.
Yeah. Anyway, over to you. You want to touch on breast screening again?
Oh, yeah, we mentioned this last time, didn't we? About the difficult story that women, very young women who'd previously had Hodgkin's lymphoma, should have been enrolled into a very high risk screening program because they're at higher risk of developing late breast cancers. And there's now a helpline available to everybody, and information's gone out to GPs subsequent to us chatting last time. And GPs have been told that if anybody contacts them anxious that they should be in the programme and aren't, to refer them to the helpline, which is 0345 877 8962. Don't think I've ever read out a telephone number on the podcast before, but I'm
You
going
did it very well, I thought.
Thank you. I'm going to say it again because it matters.
Say it again.
0345 877 8962. And you can find it easily online if you want to.
You sound like the lady who used to do directory inquiries.
Oh, do I? Oh,
Yeah.
she's.
Do you
Oh, no,
remember
she's much more
directory
polished.
inquiries? That's incredible, wasn't it? I was trying to explain that to my children the other day, that there was a thing you'd ring to get phone numbers, and they were just looking at me, I'm sorry.
Have you explained Yellow Pages to them as well?
No. Although I did once upon a time explain about the advert. Do you remember? Do you have Fly Fishing by
Oh,
JR?
J.R. Hartley.
Yeah.
Still
And
makes
the
me well at that advert.
yeah, and the lad who scratched the table when his parents were away.
God.
Anyway, I mean, literally disappearing down a rabbit hole here. But once again, it was like records, Yellow Pages, directory inquiries, the talking clock. These are all things that I've mentioned to my children. They've just completely and utterly
Vinyl
gone
is
over
back
their
though,
heads.
Steve. Vinyl is so trendy now.
Yeah, apparently so.
My
Yeah.
nephew is a convert and developing a wonderful collection. So
It's one of the
anyone
things
knows?
about living, isn't it? That, as I've got to 50, I've realized that when people used to say it's come round again and
Yeah,
I'm now cool without doing anything, you know.
Steve,
My
I just,
brother-in-law, my brother-in-law once said to my wife when we first met, he said, "You're so uncool, you're almost cool."
yeah, I
It's
just
the
pray
thing.
that velvet knickerbockers never come round again. Velvet pedal pushers. Just saying, it was perhaps not my finest fashion look of my youth.
Who's to say they haven't come round again? You can't see below the desk. Anyway, um,
Okay, moving on.
blood
Sugar.
sugar.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been quite a lot of fuss about blood sugar monitors in the last week or so, hasn't there? Have you picked up on it?
Not really, no. I mean, I know that you've got these white discs that some people have on the upper arm, but tell us, what's the story?
So, a great breakthrough in diabetes management in recent years has been constant blood glucose monitoring. So, people with diabetes, their sugar levels fluctuate. You need drugs or insulin to help control it because the pancreas is not working properly, or indeed the pancreas has failed. And when these little discs, these testing discs were created and licensed, you get all the outputs on an app on your phone. Really helpful to help you monitor your diabetes. People have extrapolated that and thought, well, hang on, monitoring our sugars and seeing what's happening. What about using them in people who don't have diabetes and using this as a way to help calorie control, look to see how our bodies process food? And the most high profile lot are the group Zoe, sort of Phil Spector's lot. Now, you remember the Zoe app was
I
hugely
remember the
helpful during
Zoe
the
study,
pandemic?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the people behind Zoe have been selling a whole package, which is a sort of diet, lifestyle management, including one of these monitors to get information for several weeks and so on. But people are buying them themselves and using them in all manner of ways. And now there's been quite a pushback by doctors saying, look, this is not evidence-based. This is creating all sorts of problems. And there's a huge risk of abuse by people with eating disorders. So I just wondered if it had come across your desk yet, Steve, because I think it might.
It really hasn't. It really hasn't. But you flagged it up to us on our WhatsApp group, didn't you? And
I did.
sent me the link, and I'm having a good look at it, and we'll do. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Shall we take a break, and then you're going to introduce our special guest?
Certainly will. Welcome back. I am absolutely delighted that we've got an old friend on the podcast today. It's Sir Harpal Singh Kumar. Harpal Kumar is known to all of us. President of GRAIL Europe, recently on Johnson & Johnson board, senior vice president. But most of us know that Harpal was with Cancer Research UK for, a decade and a half, 15 years or so, as chief exec and chief operating officer. So Harpal, it is so lovely to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you, Helen. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Harpal, great to see you. I've got a feeling that you've got up very early to do this because you are not in Westminster.
I'm not in Westminster, no. I'm actually in California right now in the GRAIL offices in Palo Alto.
Oh, get you. Hey, look at that, Helen.
I know, is it glam there, Harpal? All I can see is a white background, but is it all very stylish there?
No, it's all very boring offices
So,
here.
Harpal, we've got you on because there's so many things that we talked to you about. I mean, cancer prevention thereof, things that we talked about when I was the minister and you were running CI UK. But the reason we got you on today, you just said you're at the GRAIL offices in California. Why don't you tell people what GRAIL is and why you're on the podcast? Let's do it that way around.
Sure. Well, first of all, Steve, thank you for inviting me. That's the reason I'm on the podcast, because you invited me to be here. But let me give a bit of background, which might be helpful. And I suspect most people listening to this will be very familiar. But perhaps if I just start with an anecdote. Actually, I was talking to a colleague last week whose mother was recently diagnosed with esophageal cancer and died 3 weeks after her diagnosis.
Oh.
And we've all come across stories like this, and whether we've heard lots of them or whether we've only heard one or two, we're all familiar with them. And what we've known for a very long time is that if we detect cancers at a very late stage, our ability to find treatments that might be curative or indeed extend life for a significant amount of time is severely diminished. And so we've been working on the problem in the UK. We've been working on the problem of late diagnosis for many years now, and cut a long story short, what GRAIL is working on is a technology that uses a blood test, a simple blood draw, that might enable us to find many, many more cancers at an early stage, before they've metastasized, when we have the opportunity to at least attempt a curative treatment, and in many cases will succeed with that curative treatment. So that's what GRAIL's working on. That's what I'm working on, and it's part of probably part of a 20-year journey that I've been on to try and address this problem of late diagnosis.
And it's about what it's called. So it's the first of its kind. It's a multi-cancer early detection test. That what that does is sort of detects the signal, I suppose, that cancer cells give off. And how many cancer types would we be talking about here?
So far, we know that it can find at least 50 different cancer types.
Whoa.
And now that doesn't mean it can find every type of cancer, but the way it works is that it looks for fragments of our DNA that are shed into the bloodstream from tumors, and we're able to find those fragments which are present in minute quantities, and then look across the genome for chemical marks on the DNA called methylation sites. And we look at about 1 million of those, and we use a machine learning process to look for specific patterns that we know are shared across many different types of cancer. And just perhaps 30 more seconds on the science. Methylation is an important biological process which determines when our genes are switched on or switched off. And as we know, in cancer, many of the wrong kinds of genes are switched on or switched off, and that's what leads to the cancer progressing. And so if we can find those patterns, which are common across many types of cancer, we can look for that signal and then say, is this person likely to have a cancer or not? And the other thing that methylation gives us is the ability to say, where in the body might that signal be coming from? So although it's a blood test, if we find a cancer signal, we can then go on to say, and it's most likely to be in the pancreas or in the ovary or in the larynx or wherever else it might be.
Can I pick up on that last point, Harpal? Because my understanding is that it gives you it gives you a sort of probability of an area, but it could also be in a similar type of tissue. So it might say it's the ovary, but it might be in another type of comparable tissue to the ovary. Is that right? And just the probabilities?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Helen. So what we report what we call our prediction accuracy, and that's right about 90% of the time. It's not 100%, but it's about 90%. And what we find is that where it sometimes calls something incorrectly, that often there's a good biological reason for that. So let me give you a specific example. We know that many cervical cancers are caused by HPV virus. I think that many of your listeners will be aware of that.
Yeah, we're big fans of HPV vaccination on this podcast, Harpal, just to,
Absolutely, as am I. Well, it turns out that many head and neck cancers are also caused by HPV. And so sometimes because the biological derivation is an HPV signal, occasionally we'll get that call wrong. So what we'll say is that, and increasingly we're doing this, is what we'll say is, well, we're predicting that it's a cervical cancer, or indeed vice versa, but be aware that there's an HPV signal here, so that can help the clinician. If they don't find it in the cervix, then they might look at the head and neck, because they know that there's that what we call an axis of confusion.
And I think that's really important for people to understand, because it makes total sense at a sort of histopathological level, but the vast majority of people aren't histopathologists and don't get those associations. And so understanding that this is not a yes/no test, it's not a yes, you've got cancer, no, you haven't. It's about probabilities, and as is so often the answer, it's more complicated than that.
Indeed.
Sorry for the clarification, but I did want to sort of tease that.
And so it's another tool in the box for general practitioners and oncologists, adds to their toolbox. Is that a fair way of looking at it, Harpal?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Steve. So if we think about what happens today, the vast majority of cancers that result in death are because we found those cancers late. We found them when, they're already very advanced at the stage of diagnosis. And if you work backwards from what's happening, what is happening in most of those cases is that the patient notices something that's changed in their body. They go and talk to their GP, and the GP initiates a set of investigations. But what we now know is that for many of the deadliest cancers, those symptoms, by the time they're noticeable, the cancer's already very advanced.
Yeah.
And so the only way we can get around that is if we start to look for those cancers when they're still asymptomatic. And that's what we call screening. And what we want to do is to identify as many as possible of those really deadly cancers when they're still at the early stages of development. And it turns out that many of those cancers in the early stages are shedding DNA into the bloodstream. And so that means that there's something that we can go and look for to find those cancers early. And that's exactly what's happening. We're finding stage 1 pancreas cancers, and and that's almost unheard of.
It is.
And we know we can treat those. And so, that's the potential here that we're seeking.
And that is both exciting professionally and personally. I mean, because obviously it's called Whipple surgery, right? When you detect an early cancer in the pancreas. My father died of pancreas. We were talking, from diagnosis to death, we're talking months, and you know how quickly that one can be. Now I'll tell you what. You show me yours, I'll show you mine, Harpal. I have
not literally, please.
Oh no, sorry, that was another podcast that we were on. Anyway, you do a podcast, don't you? GRAIL do a podcast called The Cancer Signal, and you did an episode that I was looking at and listening to a bit of, called Roger's Story, detecting pancreatic cancer in its very early stages. Just tell us about that, because that sounds fantastic and could give real hope to people.
Yeah. Roger is an example of an individual who, as you say, was diagnosed with pancreas cancer as a result of using the test that we've been talking about. He had absolutely no symptoms whatsoever. He was a healthy individual. But he's someone who, is health aware in the sense of, he makes sure that he goes for his, annual checkups and everything else. And he became aware of the test and asked his GP to prescribe it for him. His GP said no, because they'd never heard of it. Anyway, he was persistent. He had it, and sure enough, he was diagnosed ultimately. I think in his case it was a stage 2 pancreas cancer rather than a stage 1, but nevertheless. And he's been treated, and a year or so later, absolutely no sign of any disease, and it looks like he's extremely healthy. It's an example of what we've just been talking about, as you say. And in fact, if I may, a lot of people say, and this is more generally the case, not specifically about GRAIL, a lot of people challenge me when I talk about early diagnosis and say, well, what's the point? Everyone who gets pancreas cancer is going to die. So why do we bother looking for it? And that is just patently not true. And we know, and this is actually quite old research now. We know that in the case of pancreas cancer, which many people think of as the deadliest of all cancers, we know that for pancreas cancer, if we find it at stage 1 or stage 2, survival rates are 50%.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. I remember years ago when I was first an MP and I used to chair the all-party group on breast cancer, and there were lots and lots of women who would come and talk at our events as survivors because primary detection of breast cancer often well survived with good treatment and caught early. And then I did some work with the ovarian cancer group, and we didn't have any voices because people don't survive it so well. And it would be the same with pancreatic. I sort of get a feeling when I talk to you, Harper, and when I hear about GRAIL, it's a bit a sliding doors moment, because these people almost shouldn't be here, should they? But they're somehow, through your trial, they're avoiding the sliding door. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting analogy. There are many analogies that people use about
Yeah.
this kind of technology. The way I look at it is as you both know, I've been working in cancer for nearly 30 years now, and the current state of play is just not acceptable. It's
Yeah.
we're across the world, we're losing more than 25,000 people every day to cancer. In the UK, we're losing more than 450 people every day to cancer. It's shortly going to be the biggest killer in the world. That cannot be acceptable, and we have to find ways of dealing with it. And we have to find ways to change the paradigm. And sadly, in the UK, we've known for some time that our survival rates are not as good as other countries that we would compare ourselves with. And we've known for a long time that the biggest single reason for that is that on average we diagnose cancers later. And
Harmful. Oh, sorry.
yeah,
And
sorry, go on.
I'd like to come back to about the late detection, our current situation, why we are behind other parts of the
Yeah,
world. What the other things that we can talk about, because obviously multi-cancer early detection tests are one exciting
yeah,
promise of the future.
yeah,
And I guess I should say other tests other than the GRAIL one are available. I think
indeed.
that the Gallery trial was one of the first to be sort of brought to get to be licensed as a test. In terms of, so just to wrap up the multi-cancer early detection tests, MSEDs first, before we go on to the late detection piece. People are curious to know when we're going to get results from the Gallery trial, because it's been a massive thing. Yeah. And there's been a lot of press coverage. When are we likely to get news as to whether the NHS is likely to adopt it or not? I mean, clearly we're not going to press you for anything more than that, because you have to follow the rules. But what's the...
Yeah. So the final results we'll get in 2026, middle of 2026, and that's when we'll look at the data we've accumulated across. We're doing 3 rounds of screening of every individual who's involved in the trial. So that's when we'll get that's when the definitive data will come through. What is also happening is that NHS England are going to look at just a few metrics from the first round of screening only. And if those data are, exciting enough, then they're thinking about moving forward with a program, for a number of individuals earlier than that, and that we will know this summer.
Okay, so this summer, so there'll be something this summer, and then the rest in 2 years. And actually, because there will be people listening who are purists in the sense of want screening to be done very much on the traditional basis. We only screen when we are absolutely 100% certain that we're going to influence the course of disease. Because one of the arguments, if you can pick disease up earlier all over the place, and all you end up doing sometimes is just giving people a cancer diagnosis for longer. If it doesn't change the course of disease,
indeed,
you just end up creating more people with cancer at any one time, as opposed to if it changes the course of the disease, that is absolutely wonderful. That's the best outcome, where you give them a better outcome and a better future. And so to 2026 before we'll really know that, but possibility of starting more testing sooner on the basis of something promising.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that.
Because Harps, there's been and I guess, look, this is the world of medical research and trials, and it's right, this is stress tested. And that's what happens out there in the academic peer research world. There have been articles. I mean, there was an article in the BMJ that I saw, October last year. Clinicians raised concern over pilot of blood tests for multiple cancers. And, people, I think the charge is that it will obviously give off those emitters that I talked about at the start at a later stage. So will it find early stage? And, there was another article a year or so before, blood tests for multiple cancers, game changer or overhyped. And, I try not to get too excited or too depressed about anything in life, certainly in politics and in health policy. But this sounds to me like it is genuinely exciting.
Well, look, I mean, I think it is. I wouldn't be at GRAIL if I didn't think that. I've spent long enough in the cancer world, and indeed, as you know, I've immersed myself in research for the last 20 years. So I think I have a fair amount of knowledge in terms of what to look for in data.
I think you do.
And as we've just been talking about earlier in this podcast, we are finding early stage cancers of the more aggressive kinds. And if we wait until we find a stage 4 pancreas cancer, there's almost nothing we can do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Whereas, if we find a stage 1, I'm using that as an illustration. There are, many types of cancer. As Helen touched on earlier, we're not the only company working in multi-cancer early detection. What I would say is, there are more than 200 different types of cancer. It is simply not feasible for us to think about a screening program for every individual type of cancer. It's never going to happen. It wouldn't be feasible for the NHS. It wouldn't be feasible for an individual.
No.
We know with 3 screening programs, the number, and I'll talk about women here because women have 3 screening programs available to them.
Yeah.
You see a drop off the more getting
the more we
3
screen.
screening programs.
Yeah.
So the notion that we could screen for many other types of cancer, looking at them one at a time, is just never going to fly.
Yeah.
So whether or not it's GRAIL, the ability to look for a number of cancers at the same time has to be the future that we reach for.
Yeah. Can we come back to how we can do better in terms of detecting disease earlier, Harpal? Because you started on that and I brought you back because I wanted to sort of wrap this loop. It hasn't changed as much over the last couple of decades as it should have. We've been talking about this for a really long time. Any observations about why the UK is behind some other parts in the world? I mean, I know we measure things very well, and frequently by measuring things well, we look worse than other countries because we just measure it better. But put that aside.
Yeah. So what we do know from the work that we've done and others have done over the last 20 years is actually survival rates are improving every year.
Yes. Yeah.
We are getting better. The challenge is so is every other country.
Yeah.
And we're not catching up. The sort of the differences are remaining. And when we first put late diagnosis on the national agenda, which actually goes all the way back to 2007 with the publication of the Cancer Reform Strategy, when I was at Cancer Research UK, we joined up with Mike Richards and the Department of Health to set up what we call the National Awareness and Early Diagnosis Initiative. Yeah. And that led to a whole sort of series of programs of work, everything from, helping GPs to develop guidelines as to when to make an urgent referral, all the way through to the Be Clear on Cancer campaigns and a bunch of
that was when
stuff.
the 2-week pathway started, wasn't it?
That was when the 2-week pathway started as well. Yeah, exactly that. And so it's not as if we haven't been doing a lot of things, and those have led to improvements. As I say, the challenge is everyone else is also improving, and the burden of cancer is increasing every year, the number of people being diagnosed. So it's almost as if we're having to run to catch up. And what hasn't changed, what I would say fundamentally, is the proportion of cancers that we're finding at an early stage. It's moved around 1 or 2% here and there. We are finding more earlier, but because the number is increasing every year, the proportion hasn't changed that significantly. And, we're only finding somewhere between 6 and 8% of cancers through screening in the UK. And, so that's, 90% plus of cancers that are only being found when they're presenting symptomatically. When you also then juxtapose that with, the challenges that we all understand in terms of the pressures on the NHS, diagnostic capacity, all the things that I'm sure you've talked about many times on the podcast. It's difficult. We're as I say, we're running to catch up, and so the ability to look for some technological solutions that might overcome some of that is obviously something that we need to keep doing.
Love it. Loveit.com. Just sort of drawing it together as we conclude. I chair the select committee here in the House of Commons, Harpal, and we were in Singapore at the back end of last year. Very interesting country. We're a small country, obviously small population. There are some early cancer detection tests that are being trialed there too. And the way they sort of put it to us, which I think was lovely, was we with cancer we try and prevent it, and where we can't prevent it, we try and find it early. And when we find it early, we treat it so it doesn't harm you. And that it's a great mantra to have. I mean, there's slightly slight agency on the words, but you know what I'm saying. And, this is part of, we find it early. And I think GRAIL is a really positive thing. And the NHS seems to be leading once again here. And we're doing our future cancer work at the moment on the select committee. We're going to publish that report very soon, hopefully after Easter. And this looks to me like future cancer.
Yeah, and actually, just on one of the last points you made there, Steve, this is a great example of the NHS working well with industry.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of criticism about clinical trials in the UK, and it's all going to pot. Actually, this is an example of the life sciences industry and the NHS working really well together. And I just think it's worth sometimes celebrating things that we don't often celebrate.
And you've just reminded me, Harpal, of course, you're also on the board of Our Future Health, which is the biggest single research trial that's happened ever, I think, in the world, certainly the biggest medical trial. And that is another collaboration across the NHS and commercial companies. So, yeah. I mean, that's a conversation for another podcast. But
Harpal, where can people find out more about you? It's GRAIL, GRAIL.com is the website. Can people interact with the program through that?
So the trial is fully enrolled, so they can't get involved in the trial now, but obviously in due course we will be publishing more data as it emerges. And we're also looking at how we can help GPs diagnose cancers faster when they do present with symptoms. So we're looking at doing some more work in that space as well. So more to come, but grail.com is the website.
Thanks so much, Harpal. It's been terrific meeting you. Thank you so much for joining us from California. Have a great day out there.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we're not in any way jealous or bitter about it. But no, I mean, look, go for a run or go for a cycle wearing just a pair of lycra small shorts or something. Is that what they do?
I'm not even going to comment on that.
Not even going to grace that. See what he did there, Helen.
He's dignified. Hey, take
Listen,
care.
God bless what you're doing. You're giving hope to people. Thank you, Harpal.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And there he goes. There goes Harpal off to the California sunshine for his early morning run. Notice how he blanked me on that, Helen.
He did, Steve, but I think you deserve that.
Yeah,
it was
I really like Harpal. I mean, or Harps as everyone calls him. I mean, he used to come into the office when I was a minister, and I just really enjoyed. He's very calm. I would imagine that Harpal has a very nice resting heartbeat. He has a good heart rate,
and he's got a lovely smile.
He really has got a lovely smile, hasn't he? Well, we'll pop a picture up of him on the social media for this. But no, that was a fascinating conversation. I mean, GRAIL has its critics, as I tried to say during that thing, and I think it's perfectly reasonable, isn't it, that you do try and test these sorts of new technologies in the health health space. But it stands up to scrutiny, doesn't it?
Well, the evidence is still awaited, Steve. And I think that's why I was saying, other products are available, other trials are available, and we really are waiting the long-term results of this. It is going to be 2026 before we've got the proper hard-nosed evidence. But I also know that NHS England, who are going to be looking at this, I think probably at the moment, if we're going to be getting results in the summer, will have got a really high bar in terms of if they're going to accept this and start using it ahead of the full research, they're only going to do so if very high standards are reached. So I think if that does happen, then there'll be a lot of hope and excitement. And if it doesn't happen, then it'll be back to the scientists to say doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means we need to get the full evidence in first.
Yeah. Okay, right. Let's press this button. That means pod surgery. Now, do you remember a few episodes ago, quite a number of episodes ago, probably, I talked about a young man called Owen Carey, who was a constituent of mine, and dear sweet Owen. He was 21, and long story short, he was out celebrating his 21st birthday with his family and his girlfriend. He had a chicken burger washed in buttermilk. He got the tube with the family down to just by the London Eye, and he collapsed and died under the London Eye from a severe allergic reaction to buttermilk.
Yeah,
and his family, Paul Carey, his dad, Emma, his sister, and his brother have launched this campaign called Owen's Law, which is you can look it up. You Google Owen's Law, owens-law.co.uk, which is about the labeling of foods on menus in restaurants, as you have to do now with takeaway sandwiches after the so-called Pret case. But something's come across my radar this week about a lady called Helen Blythe who lives in Stamford, and you can look her up on campaign online. You can look up the Benedict Blythe Foundation, which is named after her son, the most adorable little boy who's 5. He went to school in December 2021. She says he opened his advent calendar as usual. He went to school and he didn't come home because he had an allergic reaction at school. And a food allergy, an allergic reaction to a food allergy. And she has this campaign called Benedict Blythe Foundation in memory of her son to try and get more awareness and funding in schools to make sure that schools have allergy policies in place. Her research says 1 in 3 schools do not have those policies in place. And so, she's got a real thing going here, I think.
Yeah, I thank you for pointing this one out, Steve, because I think I'd missed this because I think it didn't make national news. It was more regional, but it does follow on so well from what we were talking about Owen's Law. And I feel pretty passionately about this, about, the use when people have allergies, but they're traveling, so on trains, on aeroplanes, and we should be clear on how important it is for the public to understand and take seriously any requests for, if you get that message on an aeroplane about someone on board has a peanut allergy, please don't even think about opening a pack of nuts. But this one about Benedict and schools is really interesting because as a GP, I seem to issue lots of prescriptions to auto-injectors so that kids can keep a set in school. And the schools in the area where I am in Lichfield seem really clued up, but we do have quite a lot of kids with severe allergies. I wonder if some of these schools are ones where they haven't yet had a child with severe allergy, because I'm shocked that if 1 in 3 don't have a policy in place, because there are standard off-the-shelf, really good policies available, and schools and education authorities are usually very happy to share. So I'm sure this can be improved. I mean, every teacher wants the best for the children in their care, right? I mean, I can't imagine any teacher wanting to be in this situation. What about the worst thing to ever happen, to have one of your children, one of the people you're responsible for, have an allergic reaction in front of you and you not be able to save them?
Yeah, well, I mean, so it's Benedict Blythe, BLYTHE.com. BenedictBlythe.com. That's the Benedict Blythe Foundation. You can find out a bit about it, see what they're doing, and ask your kids' school whether they have that policy in place. Anyway, that's enough for this week. We've gone on long enough, covered some really good stuff. Any final thoughts from you?
I've got one last thing from me, Steve, and that, we're in the middle of Ramadan currently.
I do.
And also we're in the middle of Lent. So lots of people are thinking about restricting food intake for lots of reasons. Have you ever used intermittent fasting in your sort of diet and lifestyle? We know that the Prime Minister fasts at the start of the week. Lots of people do it.
Not deliberately, no.
Oh yeah, that's the life of an MP, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
famine,
it's a constant intermittent fasting.
Well, my husband and I started intermittent fasting about, probably a year or so ago. And we've stuck with it because what that actually means in our case is that from about 8 o'clock in the evening we don't eat anything until noon the following day. So we tend to restrict our eating to sort of lunch and evening meals. We've basically skipped out breakfast, no snacks at all. We're pretty strict about it when we can do. And actually, I feel great at it. Having always been a breakfast person, I absolutely fine not having breakfast. And I only ever I don't drink fluids with milk in anyway, so having black tea and coffee in the morning suits me fine. But shock horror, because there's been a lot of popularity of these sort of approaches. Intermittent fasting could lead to higher risks of cardiovascular death, is the headline that's been reported this week. The huge American Heart Association annual conference is happening at the moment in Chicago. And this research has just been presented. Now, it's not been published in a peer-reviewed journal, but there's quite a huge study of many thousands of people, but only followed their dietary habits for a few days, but then followed up their health for about 8 years and found there was a significantly higher risk of heart attack or stroke. So even the authors themselves are saying don't change anything yet, because there are clearly lots of theoretical benefits for doing this, and people are definitely seeing weight loss and reduced blood pressure and cholesterol management for doing it. We don't understand why we're seeing this increase in deaths, so more research is needed.
Yeah, no, I saw the story on the news this morning. I thought it was really interesting. And obviously it's got a timely relevance for the reasons you said. But no, there's never a shortage of health stories, is there?
There never is. It's true.
Anyway, Thanks for listening. You can find us on X, Prevention Pod. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. We're always keen to hear from you. Always keen to hear what you think of our little podcast and ideas for things that we might talk about or guests that we might have. One very interesting guest, actually, Helen, somebody I visited recently with the select committee who's going to come on and talk to us about something, a Cytet sponge. It's a sponge that helps detect esophageal cancer. I'll say no more. That will be
interesting.
But we're going to talk to Marcel about his sponge.
Excellent.
There you go. You never thought you'd hear those words this afternoon. Okay. Nice to see you.
And you.
We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.